to be back with all of us today for our week 3. And it's the last episode before we will have our final episode with the author of the book, The Master Plan, Chris Wilson. So just a quick couple of housekeeping notes is feel free to use the chat box on YouTube to the right and let us know, go ahead and let us know where you're from, maybe a word of how you're feeling. And a quick note, if you find that you're unable to comment, be sure that you are subscribed to our channel in order to do so. So as you settle in, I'll share a little bit about TRF and outline a little of what you can expect from today's show. We are a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to supporting and growing a community of clinicians, researchers, educators, and people whose lives are affected by trauma. We offer a variety of programs from our conferences that we have through a year, our institute, which houses all of our certificate programs, research, where we offer research grants out on a number of focus areas, and then community offerings, which book club is included in. We also have TRF Tuesday, where we do 20-minute somatic practices every week. We have an inspired parenting program. So do go over to our website and check out our calendar events and a number of programs. We invite our community to peruse all that are interesting to them. So today's session, each week, if you're new, we basically bring together as many as 15 panelists from our community. We will be discussing The Master Plan, My Journey from Life in Prison to a Life of Purpose by Chris Wilson and Bret Witter. And again, next week is the final episode, same time, same place, where Chris Wilson will be joining us for a live Q&A. We are excited to invite our virtual community to participate in the discussion with us in all the ways that feel good for you. So again, what you can do is you can use that chat function to share your comments throughout the session. And our team here at TRF are all tuning in. We'll be sharing your comments from the virtual community after each discussion question. And if you, in the future, if you would like to join us as a panelist, please feel free to apply. There's always a form available on our website. This for our next one will be closing it off for our next one, as for the final Q&As, we always choose from the panelists who have already been participating with us throughout the week. So our next book we will announce at the end of next book club. We're very excited for what's coming up. And so we hope that you will continue to be with us in the way that feels good for you. Just to say, we do really try and welcome voices, a diverse array of voices from age, gender, occupation. It's really been wonderful to welcome voices that represent a diversity of experiences and thoughts. Another thing to share is that we have partnered with a TRF Alliance member for this book club that we typically like to do. Our Alliance member is a group of organizations that are similar in mission to TRF, and it's in a way for us to open up our communities, provide a broader platform, and share some of their programming. So our partner for this book club was the Yoga Prison Project, and they will be hosting, or they hosted a special event in partnership with us last week. So make sure to go out and check out their organization, as they are doing wonderful things in the world. And lastly, a quick shout out to our wonderful team of TRF team members that are here with us and make this program possible. Pat Murray is our media manager here. Stephanie Kimball is our program lead on book club, and Laura Walsh with us as our program manager. And with that, I would love to introduce to you our co-moderator here, Frederick, who was with us for from the very beginning and has come through with us for all the last couple of seasons as a panelist and is now moderating with us. Frederick, I am trying to pull up your bio right now.
Don't worry, I am just a fellow learner. I worked as an educator and clinician, so I think that's all is needed to know. I appreciate talking.
Oh, I would love to
What-
invite you to share a little bit, just a little bit more about yourself, because you do have such an amazing experience and it's just wonderful for people to know. So would you be open to sharing just a little bit more?
So basically, I started with the first book club, and it's been really nice to be a co-facilitator. And I just invite all to know that this is a wonderful opportunity. So basically, my life has been as a clinician. I work at UMass Medical School, Chan Medical School, and my work now is looking at organizational change around trauma-informed practices. And so this is a great opportunity to think about different ways that we can explore how do we talk about trauma and resilience in ways that are actionable and helpful to build awareness, understanding, and opportunities for growth for everyone. So I hope
Awesome.
that's good enough.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, and then just a big thank you to all of our panelists that are with us today. And the way that you can learn more about them is that every single time a panelist comes and shares for the first time, Stephanie will be dropping a little snippet about who they are into the chat for you to feel more connected and tuned. With that, I think we're ready to kick off into our first question. Let me pull that up for us. And one more note, just as I pull that up, is because of the nature of our discussion and conversation and the sensitivity of some of the topics, we always remind people to be in tune with yourself and take care of yourself. If things are coming up, you can try placing both feet on the ground, tuning into your breathing, maybe drinking some water, but just to make sure that you keep an eye on your own wellness throughout our conversation. So here we are to share a couple of salient points that we always start off with is, number one, the justice system in our country is set up to make success hard and then blames victims for falling within. Number two, Chris moved in with Eric and his wife, Camille, and immediately started hustling to get back on his feet. And number three, Chris's parole officer rewarded him for his hard work and allowed him to communicate with Steve, even though this was typically against the rules. Frederick, do you want to kick us off with question number one?
Yes. So the question is, what factors made it challenging for Chris' family to continue to support him? I want to say before for our panelists come in, what factors that made it difficult for his family to continue to support him. I found it very interesting the ways in which Chris highlighted different dimensions of how he was experiencing this and how he was exploring or thinking through what was happening with his family. I'm curious if any of you thought through that as well and found it interesting, and how have you been able to think through how his family engaged and disengaged with him, and what could have been some of the possible challenges around that? Just take your time to think about it. Stephen, please share with us.
So I think they had a lot of their own challenges that they were addressing. The life that they were living, and throughout the book you read about the traumas that his mother experienced, and therefore it's the saying goes, if your cup's overfilling, how can you help somebody else? So I just look at from my position, what I do is a crisis intervention team police lieutenant, of the missed opportunities, not just to help Chris, but the entire family. And they really weren't in a position because they had to take care of themselves. And Chris addressed that with himself in this chapter later on with what he had to do to help his son.
Yeah, I agree with you. The compounding complex challenges that the family was navigating themselves, it made it very hard within on the context to support him. How about other people? Like what are your thoughts around that? I mean, what about his sister or his grandmother and grandfather who were very active in his life prior to what's your thinking around that? Or I'm curious if I know it's been a while, maybe some people have read the book a long time ago, but I thought through this in a way that, you know, how does this impact families in terms of when someone is incarcerated and their engagement or disengagement? Okay, Jess, please jump in.
Hi, yeah. So, it's a lot of times the family, um, it's a struggle, right, for them to be able to get to the facility. And then a lot of times it happens, like the incarcerated individual is, housed so far away from their family that they don't have the means financially to be able to see their loved one. And I think a lot of that, with Chris's family is they weren't exactly in a very good financial spot. And with him being far away, it made it difficult. And I see that throughout, I think that's like something that happens through the nation is a lot of times they're housed in a different county or different city or state, and it makes it difficult for the loved one to visit them. So they lose that support system.
Right. So the proximity of where the location is and where the correction facility is can create another barrier, the financial barrier, the distance. That is very much a contributing factor as well. Kira, you're next. Thank you.
Hey, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm going to say the word, right? I'm going to name the word shame, right? That's a big thing that I saw over and over again, even after he did get out and he became his, I love how he says returning citizen, and he became that. And he talks about a time where he encounters, I guess, what happened with his brother, and he had lost his job and so forth. And his grandmother it was still sort of that they didn't believe in him, even after he had accomplished so much, there was still this lack of like belief because of the stigma, because of what happened, and just the layer of shame. And so that's the answer to my question. That's a big factor that contributed during and after.
And it's so funny too that the power of shame on families, just the emotional piece of having someone incarcerated and all the work the family had put in to just get him to just make it and survive, and the impact of shame and other stronger emotions is so powerful in this conversation. So I want to have Amy go next, and then after Amy, Dr. Walker. Yes. Thank you.
So I would have to agree, shame, grief, fear, proximity. I think that is also a good point to bring up. My son, who is a juvenile, was incarcerated in the state of Georgia. I live in Minneapolis. And I found that there were a number of barriers that prevented us from actually communicating with him. The rules change, as we saw happen with Chris so very often, and he had to pivot. And things like asking to have letters sent to our child and then having all of them returned, indicating that they weren't on the list, but there never was an approved list. So the rules change, and it's really unfortunate what is lost: an opportunity for connection, an opportunity for mental health, protecting or taking care of mental health. And then also, you know, in the case with my son, you know, it was a matter of, he had 1 hour a week in which he could have someone come and visit him. Luckily, we had some miles and I was able to go down each week, but not everyone has that, and it's not okay. And I feel like this book just puts a fire in me to want to change things. And I'm grateful to Chris for telling this story and being so authentic and truthful.
It's interesting that you talked about just how the unpredictability of the the different struggles, challenges around just the list, having a list and not having a list, and how there was no uniformity, but yet these barriers only impacted negatively the person incarcerated, but also the family as well, and how that perpetuates this isolation and challenges in this extraordinary creativity or resources that's needed to move forward. Like you said, luckily you had Miles. So I know we have multiple hands up. We have question 2 coming up. I'm gonna end off with Dr. Walker, but Teresa will remember many of you for the next question. So Dr. Walker, you're gonna have the last say for this question. 1.
Yes, thank you again. The thing that stuck out to me in the midst of this paradigm, as I like to view it, is the grief that the family had to go through. So mentioned in statements that Chris made referencing his mom, his sister, saying, we have spent so much money, that's why we can't. These calls are $80-something a piece for however long, and him not even understanding the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars maybe, that they had spent. We had an $800-something phone bill, like we can't even pay rent, and this is what we're having to do. So I thought of the grief, the financial, the economic standpoint, the shame someone already mentioned, but also the grief that in many families, it's the loss of what we thought could have been or should have been. And all the dreams, all the goals that we had for you, it's almost like we disconnect because we can't handle this level of grief and pain, that not only the system is saying you're not enough, but on a certain level, it's also saying that we were not enough, that we did something wrong. So those are the factors that stood out the most to me. And just, you know, when he had his resentencing or parole hearing, where he looked in the crowd and he knew his family wasn't going to be there. Just so it just demonstrated the level of loss that they experience, not wanting to show up and be disappointed again, because his mom said, hey, you know, what do you mean you're getting out? You got life. So life was supposed to be a death sentence. They just mourned earlier than his physical demise. Emotionally, they disconnected so they could survive his incarceration.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was the grief, the impact on not just Chris, but the family, and what does that do to them, and how critical it is for their own survival, possibly having to disconnect because of the challenge around that. I think you really touched on that, Ro. Teresa, please take us to question 2.
Thank you, Frederick, and everyone who shared so far. A quick tune into our virtual space. I don't have a name, but KM Ryder has shared, it's hard not to feel like there's no way to win. So that feels very true and on point. And just a quick note again to those who are with us on YouTube, feel free to share and chat through the chat function, and we'd love to include you in your comments and on our discussion. So question number 2, which feels, yeah, maybe like a continued expansion from lots of what was just shared, is how does perceiving oneself as a burden negatively impact an individual's mental health? So how does perceiving oneself as a burden negatively impact an individual's mental health? And Dr. Walker, so much of what you were just sharing, I feel like goes into speaking about this and perceiving, Chris's perception and knowledge, and then the reflection from the family of everything that they that was their journey and impact for them. How might that have been continually burdening? So let's start first with Sister Debbie Rhodes. Love to hear from you.
Hi. I was told my whole childhood that I was a burden, so I felt like I definitely wanted to answer this question. And I think that whatever self-doubts or self-aversion you already have gets confirmed, and you feel like you deserve to be alone in your mess. And you think that any need, no matter how small, that you have will be a burden. So you stop asking for help, and your world gets smaller and smaller, to the point where even if someone offers to help, you can't accept it, because no matter how many times they assure you you're not a burden, you don't believe it. And you've become so identified with being a burden. And in fact, I think that if once you get to that point, if someone tries to offer you help or love, you actually can get angry about that, because it messes with your own self-perception. And, I've seen that people responding in anger because it just goes against everything they think about themselves. And it's like a challenge to their own self-perception.
Yeah. Thank you for going into the nuances behind that and sharing a little bit about, your own experience with that. There is one small part in the book that I just come across, which is when the grandmother wants to see Chris's car, and this Corvette that had really become such a milestone for Chris, and that he's so proud of, and you can hear that he's proud of in his writing. And yet in that moment when his grandmother, says to see it, and he's kind of like, oh, no, it's not a big deal. But just even that bit of does it feel uncomfortable after a lifetime of being thought of as a burden, that when someone wants to come and even give praise or give love, that it becomes uncomfortable. Right. So I thought that was so small, but an interesting potential part of this question. Thank you. Jess, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I really think, thank you for sharing that. And, kind of piggyback a little bit off of that, is I feel like when we see ourselves as like a burden, we then become like closed off to our emotions and our feelings, and we press them down, right? We suppress them. And I think that can lead to depression. And other issues, like mentioned before, anger and things like that. So I think him seeing himself as a burden, luckily he throughout his book he really talks about how there's some resilience there in him, so he didn't fall really into that category. But I think when we start feeling like we're a burden for somebody, we're shut off to our own emotions. So
yeah, thank you. And just imagining that from the time that he was young and being a burden, and how much he was continuously actually being the caretaker for his family, for his mother, then for his community, then for all the people he cared for in prison and after that. And what happens when you become so much of a caretaker and feeling like, as the opposite side of that coin, that you're too much for other people, what happens as that compounds through life. Thank you, Jess. Dorian.
Cool. There we go. Unmuted now. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the points of incarceration. And I'm not just talking about being inside of a prison, but the entire post Civil War project with Jim Crow, and all the way through to the new Jim Crow. Part of the purpose is to psychologically damage the individual so that they feel like they're a burden to the culture and to society, and it's a continuous cycle. So I mean, it's I kind of forget what the original question was, but it's a very understandable thing for an individual like Chris to go through these mental feelings and impulses, because it's literally designed to do that. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Dorian. I also found it interesting afterwards that he comes out and then has to begin to start paying the state back in all of these fees, and how insurmountable that can be when you're coming out, and the amount that you're making compared to then what you have to pay, and this continuation that even when you're out, you are now having to pay the state. Stephen, please share.
Yeah, if I can just add that the feeling of being a burden is going to lower his ability to utilize his social supports. And we're all dependent on social supports in our life and everything we do, emotionally. And in the book, as he talked about the financial the supports that he needed for his business to grow, but emotionally, we need social supports for everything we go through, specifically trauma, of who do we have to vent to, who do we have to be there to give us that support. And of course, it's without, you start feeling that you're a burden, you're not able to accept that help, it's definitely going to lead to the impact of depression, anxiety, that leads in sort of getting off topic, but the larger problems in society when people lash out because of, I mean, we always think that that people react, and we think of depression of the person laying in bed not being able to get out of bed, but at times it is lashing out and being aggressive and looking and really realizing that. And again, to add to what you said about the way he's treated by the system when he is released from incarceration, of the system, instead of being a social support to him, to support him, it's a detriment to him, and how he is going to move on with his life.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it makes me think about the fact that he rode a bike for a year, and how many times some people in his community were reaching out saying, don't live there, come live here. And that people who continually to experience trauma, that, right, even if there are supports around them, how difficult it is to say yes to receiving it. And then the final part around isolation, how does this continue to create more and more isolation and make the path to recovery that much more difficult?
If I can just add, I work every day with people. I was today with a young man taking him to court to actually get a warrant recalled who's in recovery from substance abuse. And I see daily the same fights people with substance abuse have, of how do they get and maintain their recovery from substance abuse when there's systematic problems, because the system is there for the system, where we have to help them as individuals.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, and we'll move on to the next question, but I guess one thing, to pose is, in trauma healing, how is it that then we can really work on repairing the relationships, our giving, and the ability to just have that giving and receiving functionality repaired, which is then really based upon trust. How do we restore the ability to trust that we can ask, or trust that we can even receive? And what does that healing process look like? So thank you everyone for inputting on that question. Yeah, a comment from our virtual community, Pastor K, saying this is an outstanding example of how dominant the thought process is in making life choices. Yeah, an outstanding example of how dominant the thought process is in making life choices. Thank you, Pastor K. Okay, we'll move on to our third question today.
So first, I want to say this conversation, I know we're just warming up, but this is so fascinating to hear the different perspectives. And I feel like you're all in my, well, you are all in my living room. So, but we're virtually very far apart. But it's just interesting. I appreciate hearing how you can approach this conversation from different viewpoints, and just the deep capacity to empathize and to try to understand. The next question I find it really fascinating. What aspects of Chris's attitude seem to shift his perspective on his position? What aspect of Chris's attitude seems to shift his perspective on his position? You know, what did he have in him to help him shift? Because we've just talked about structural challenges, historical challenges around trauma, and just all these areas. But there's something that was so unique within the human nature, his humanness, that allowed him to shift. And I'm curious about it. Kelly, please share with us.
Thank you. So I think he had hope, and he started to experience a little bit of success. So he got his GED. He realized that he had the power to make change in his life and started to get confidence. And in a program that I work with, we teach kids how to have hope, like believing in themselves, believing in others, and believing in their dreams. And I think that's what was maybe missing from some of Chris's family to support him, is that like maybe they didn't have that hope, or they had been so beat down by like all the systems and seeing other people go through and not be successful. So they had that fear that maybe he wasn't going to be successful. But I think once he experienced a little bit of success, then he kind of, like we say, hope begets hope. So you have a little bit of success, he's going to work a little bit harder and do the next thing. Then he graduates from that carpentry program, and he realizes, like, you know what, it's okay that my mom is not here or that my family is not here, because this is not about them, it's about me. And like it was like he just had this like light bulb of like, I can do this and I'm in control. And this is what I want to do. And that's what I think like starts him to like, I can make this plan and I can set these goals and have these dreams. And I know if I put in the work, I can make things happen for myself. And that's hope.
Thank you. So hope is a critical ingredient. I have some more comments on that, and I think hope is so critical. I'm curious. Thank you so much for that. I'm curious for more insights on that. Hope is critical. Nicole, please share with us.
Yes, sure. I also had the same feeling, hope. It was when he started to hope for things to be better and he could visualize. He often called it he was positively delusional, but I feel almost silly calling it that now because it ended up not being a delusion. He ended up reaching those achievements. So it was entirely hope. And the reason I wanted to answer this question is I'm a part of the Prison Yoga Project community. And I have the honor of practicing yoga with folks in jail on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And reading this book has been really hard. Just always a reminder of what the folks we serve are experiencing on a daily basis. It's like, you know it, but to constantly sit with it is really challenging. And I remember walking in like last Tuesday, feeling hostility towards the system, like more so than usual. I always feel angry towards the way we choose to incarcerate folks, but I felt particularly like everything I could see, I was like, and hear the sound of the metal, like the way they're interacted with, all of that just takes away hope. So not only did reading this remind me how valuable hope is, but it reminded me that that's something we can do through our yoga programs. We don't often say that that's like an outcome of our programs. We'll talk about reduced stress, reduced depression. We'll talk about the ways that folks can transform and have empathy. But I think hope is so huge, especially in some of the places we serve, like administrative segregation or death row, or folks that are sentenced to life. Like, we are obviously there to help rehabilitate folks for when they return to their communities, but also for folks that are there the rest of their lives or think they might be. So just wanted to re-emphasize hope, and then also give a shout out to his determination and his discipline. I think those are yogic values as well, and the discipline that he had to also make those visualizations come true was amazing.
So hope and discipline, and I think that's really just so true. And you talked about, which was said in the book, the positive delusions. I wonder, do we have to, in some ways, disassociate having delusions in order to make it? Can reality be so hard to confront that we have to have some kind of delusion, an alternate sense of reality in order to make it through? Is that necessary?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think for the books. Yeah.
Yes. So let's get a few more people in here. I'm gonna try this one more time. Akura. Yes, please tell me. Close. Achara. Sorry, yeah. Again, I'm gonna try it one more time. Please share with us, please.
So I'm just to be quick, I wrote my notes down. So just on the hope piece, right? The scene of him driving in his Corvette and sitting outside the prison to show everybody, that scene, to instill hope in them, that scene sticks out to me with the hope piece. And then what you just said about, disassociation, but he even says in the book, right, disassociation, I don't think he uses that word, but that's basically what it is the price of survival, right? And then he also talks about faith and belief a lot, right? I think one of the aspects he had was faith and belief in himself. And then he talks about that scene where Mr. Edwards comes back from this international trip and he speaks to he and Steve and says, God told me you guys were going to get out. You have a vision. And he said in that moment, his conviction was so strong that it made him believe that that was true and it was going to happen. And so that reminds me of, the support that he had around him, and the part of him saying, I think one of the chapters is like, remain a lifelong learner. He was very much dedicated to learning, and I'm going to get out, I'm going to be more. And so I guess my conclusion of that is, like, knowledge doesn't eliminate fear, right? Knowledge doesn't eliminate fear, but it can mitigate it. It can mitigate it a bit. And him having this knowledge, I think, quelled his fear of maybe not getting out. The more he learned, I think the more his hope grew, and the more that then he had the success and the people around him saw, because no matter how many times he got, we speak to resiliency, he got, sort of knocked back down, he would get back up. And yeah, so I don't know if that's his nervous system being adapted to fight or flight, right? And he's like constantly fighting to get out. I don't know what that is, but it definitely, from what I heard in him, and I've been listening to the book, so him, saying it in his own words, faith, I think, and belief in himself had a lot to do with it.
And just because this is so exciting, and I want to say that we're going to pepper the answers to this question throughout these questions, I hope. We just have just a few, just less than a minute before we go into the next question. But I want to say, in addition to hope and discipline, one of the things I thought was quite interesting, that he was such a fascinating observer. He was able to really observe and to understand to put it together, that whole observation and an ability to reflect. And that was something very fascinating for me. And he was able then to begin to think about, what are the small things I can do? What are the many little steps forward? And we talked about the discipline. But it takes such an extraordinary sense of resilience to be able to put all this together as you are encountering extraordinary obstacles in different ways that negate your humanity and your sense of worthiness. I think that is quite fascinating. Unfortunately, I would love to ask for more comments on this, but we have to go to the next question. But I want you to weave these ideas into the next question. Teresa, we return back to you.
Well, thankfully, as everyone's feedback has been shaping, it's been leading into really nicely into kind of two questions that we had. So hold those thoughts, because I think they'll be able to apply to these two questions that we had, that I'm just going to put into one, since they're kind of around the same focus area, but continuing in the theme of this dedication, this determination, this faith. Online, we had a comment that shared, it was like Chris was able to imagine his hopes. And so the next questions for you to think about along this discussion is, we kind of touched on this one, so I'm going to go to the next one, but just to read this one is, what does Chris mean by, it's not one day that changes your life, it's every day? So again, a lot of people already spoke on this, but why is the determination to finish disappointing tasks such an important life skill? So we have that there, but it's not one day that changes your life, it's every day. And this is the question to more so focus on, and maybe just get a little bit more granular, because this book is called The Master Plan. How did Chris utilize his master plan to stay on track after the administration's cruelty and all the disappointment he faced? Discuss Chris's approach of being positively delusional. So maybe just thinking in a little bit more of even the way that he wrote the book, and that he goes through and he's reading to us all of the things on his master plan, and just the effect of him saying, done. I think that's the word that he said. But he continues to revisit it. So maybe just speaking to, how is he really utilizing this tool that has brought him all the way from when he received his sentence all the way through continually to his life now, in order to survive. Dr. Walker.
Oh my goodness, you guys have me panicked over here. I've been sitting on the edge of my seat. Oh my goodness, a couple of things that are standing out to me, and hopefully it's interwoven in everything we're talking about. I thought about the highlight he had from W.E.B. Du Bois. It's the craftsmanship that counts. Building something beautiful and building it right gives you a sense of purpose and accomplishment nobody can take away, no matter how hard they try. And I remembered, I started penning it for myself, paying attention to the details. Paying attention to the details, because it creates, when you start talking about, a day, how does it build? So it creates habits, healthy habits. At a certain phase, when I was just starting out in trauma work, and they felt like they put me in the smallest room in the building to treat traumatized people in. And one day I walk in, long story short, and I kept it on my wall for the longest. What do you do when what you see is greater than where you are? So at some point we move from dream to vision. Dream is about an individual person. Vision is about impacting a people. And somewhere in the midst of Chris's transformation, if you will, his evolvement, he moved from just dreaming big to envisioning big. His dreams were about him You can't impact a nation, a world out of a Corvette, but you can out of a book. You can out of the programs that he created, even when the administration did take the money and do something to encapsulate them even the more. He was able to dream beyond, to see rather, beyond his day-to-day circumstances. So that's what I wanted to say. But yes, strengthening those small things, perfecting the small things, created habits that literally transformed his life. And I could go on and on, but I'm gonna stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. I'd love for, I mean, any of the panelists and also people in the virtual community, if you want to do just by a show of hands, who has, if they didn't have one before, but now has one since reading this book, written their master plan. I know I have. So yeah, a lot of people's comments are on visioning and being able to see it through and these details. So yeah, if you're in the virtual audience, feel free, if you would like, to share one thing that's on your master plan that even if this is the first item you're creating on your master plan, to go ahead and share it, because that, as what we've seen with Chris, is a good first step to having that happen. Okay, let's have, I believe, Amy, your hand has been up for some time, and then we'll move on to Sister Debbie.
Thank you. A quote that has been running through my mind lately is, what punishments of God are not gifts? And this really seemed to be so relevant in reading this book. I feel like Chris took hardship and adversity, and like unbelievable hardship, and turned it into opportunity for personal growth, for professional growth, contagious growth. There just was this pure beauty in what it is that he achieved.
Yeah, thank you so much for that reflection. Sister Debbie?
Sort of working off from that, back in January, I was on a 5-day silent retreat, and one of the nuns said to me, this is from Matthew's Gospel, what parent, if their child were hungry, would give them a stone or give them a serpent? They would give them bread. And so my mantra after that was kind of, when anything feels like a serpent, even if it's actually biting you, try to figure out how it's bread, because bread is life-giving. And so I think that that's what Chris was doing. Like what she said, he was figuring out what he could take from these, bad things that were happening and take something good about it. And I think that, it says that he was shattered after the and I just, that word, like, he was shattered after he found out what the administration did with the money. And I think that, like, he had a moment where his sense of self was shattered, because he thought that he had earned their trust and their respect, and therefore they would do what they promised to do. And in that moment, he realized they didn't respect him. And also they were going to do whatever it was they wanted to do, regardless of how hard he worked. He was just another, number in the system, which is the thing they try hardest to make you believe, is that you're, and the first question he asked himself was, what's my end game? Like, he reminded himself about his master plan. Why is he doing this? Why is he staying in it? And so I think that he was able to just get right back on track. And, because he had it written down, like, it's really one thing to have ideas in your head, and it's another thing to have it on paper. That's why in AA, they make you write down your 4th step, and not just tell your resentments and fears and shame to another person, but you actually have to write it out, because you see it in a whole different way when it's on paper. And so he could see it in front of him. Okay, this happened. This is awful. But what's the end game and what do I have to do to get there, and like be able to push that aside. So.
Thank you, Sister Debbie. It makes me think of a term that I've come across recently around generative conflict. And for conflict to be generative, there's a need, or there's a strong need to have a sake of knowing for what helps us hang in there when we get triggered, what helps us hang in there when things get tough. And so it feels like, yeah, with what you're saying, you know, Chris used that list in order to continue to see, as things are happening, how can this be an opportunity to stay focused on his end game. And another thing that I love about generative conflict is looking at how you can move to a power with versus a having power over, this uneven power dynamic versus power with. When we're generating from conflict, it means all of us then come onto a same equal level and we're working on the same playing field. And that, yeah, it's taking an input to be something that then can be a fuel for us to work from, as opposed to being either like a victim of it, perhaps. So
yeah, there's this saying that if you have a why, you can deal with any how. So if if you always keep that why in mind, you can just deal with whatever comes your way on the way there.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to, Dorian, hopefully you can keep your hand and thought for the next question. Let's go to our next one, which I know I've kind of changed it up a bit because our topic of conversation was covering a bunch. So here is question 5.
All right. Discuss the concept of remorse. What are your thoughts on the victim impact group? Discuss the concept of remorse. What are your thoughts on the victim impact group? And I see that, Dorian, your hand is up. So I would love for you to go first.
Yeah, I was very into the, we'll just see what happens. I'm sure I can say something. Yeah, I mean, remorse is such a common thing. So I do music therapy at Rikers Island, and that's we do a lot of engagement with the folks that we're serving there, and this is a completely made up number. This is a call with a whole bunch of professionals, so this is not actual data. But the way I kind of think about when working with folks is that 98% of the time we have dialogues and engagements that are like this, and there's a 2% area where their behavioral health is their emotional health is so stunted that the most minor thing can set them to such a high level. And the thing that I've learned just, from getting to know a lot of the people that we're working with, is that after something may happen, even just yelling at somebody, all the way up to full on assault, but there's always regret and remorse after the fact. It is, I think this is an actual number. I think it's a 0.1% of actual sociopathy in the world. So it's a very small percentage, just as any other space. So people really do feel a lot of remorse. Now, that being said, with victim impact groups, I mean, this is one of the most complicated emotional back and forths just from working in these spaces, because we can, I literally have it up on my wall here, but it's empathy and accountability, in that you can be empathetic towards the individual who is in the middle of a struggle, but there also has to be accountability for the actions that have taken place. I'll just give an example, but there are three parents that I'm working with who are in for homicide due to committing homicide against a spouse of one of their children who was abusive. And I have a 2-year-old, and if I had, if I had something like this happen and there was the split second moment, I'm not even going to pretend that I wouldn't do what some of the individuals have done. If there's some space, probably wouldn't have made the decision that they made, which is the case with all three of these individuals. But the point is that it's just a lot more complicated than somebody is doing something. It's oftentimes people who are perpetuating violence upon another person, they are a victim themselves. And so it's a huge impact just on engaging with victims, because I mean, we're all victims to a certain extent, and having holistic support is essential. So yeah.
Thank you, Dory. Let's just get more people in. Thank you so much. Sister Debbie, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so just first with remorse, it's a lot more than feeling bad about what you did. So in theological terms, which is the only way I can really speak, it's true penitence and sorrow for the sin that you committed, and a true willingness to make amends and to allow yourself to be transformed into a different person, into the kind of person that would no longer do the thing that you did before. And that includes making restitution, whether it's, financial or otherwise. And for the victim impact groups, wait, I'm trying to get my piece of paper. I write everything down because of my concussion. So it said that Chris didn't really think about the person whose life he took until he was part of that group. And, I work in maximum security prisons. So, and I've heard many people, murderers, rapists, the top tier, who committed those kind of crimes, who said the person that, the victim was, what I've heard call an unreal other, the way we sometimes make people of other races, religious or ethnicities, gender preference, whatever, an unreal other. And hearing the victim stories makes them a real person, and you can no longer other them, because, so once, so Chris was able to see them as a person no different than himself, with feelings, and like the person who cried out for his mom, that he was not a monster, he was a person, right? And once he saw that, some part of him that had hardened over the years, I think, just cracked open and softened. And he knew that he needed to dedicate the rest of his life to making amends for what he did, in part by helping other people like himself to not get to the point where they would commit that kind of a crime. So.
Yes. So I want to get one more voice in. Thank you, Sister Debbie. Amy, you have your hand up.
I feel like it was truly the route to, as it says in the book, I spent the years after finding my remorse, I spent the years working every day to be the man the world needed me to be. And there's just such beauty in that recognition. And the other part that really stuck out to me was the way that the younger, I believe that, I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, but Bamas, the young, loud folks who were incarcerated, just the way that they made jokes about the woman, her appearance after she had described losing, her granddaughter. It made me cry. And I found the retelling of that incredibly powerful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that as we talk about this, and you've highlighted all these very important points around remorse and victim impact group, and how critical it is to understand the different factors that impact people in their decisions, and how important the stories, the lives of the people who have impacted, that inflicted the harm, but also the people and their families and all the people who were victims as well, because it is not a one person. What I hear also is that it's not one person or two people that's harmed, but it's a larger community and within a society, a groupings. There are multiple. The impact is so beyond the two or the three that are in the center of the circle, and how that is really critical. And then what are the ways in which we restore and heal and move forward? And one of the things I hear is critical. In order to move forward, you also have to be very present in knowing what are the factors that contribute to this, and to be able to hear it and or experience it, whatever it is, to be able to center that into the circle, not just what just happened, but all the things that contributes to it, in order to have I don't know if it's understanding, but a sense of a deeper capacity to hold possible opposing ideas and opposing emotions at the same time. So I say all that to say it is not easy, and it's not something that it can just be rushed through. It's truly a process. And I know Teresa is going to take us to another space, but I wanted to talk about that as important. And one of the final things that's connected to our earlier questions, this idea of vicarious resilience, the ability to learn resilience, the belief to be strong after you hear the struggles and the pains of others, and you find something in their narrative and their struggle that can actually help you become a better person. Because one of the things I find is interesting, the various people that Chris encountered, their narratives and stories helped him also become a better person. And I think we as people, as we read this story, his narrative, I believe that it can help all of us become better, because we find our own humanity in the through lines that we have that are very similar, but very different in terms of our experiences. So I'm off this box. I just want to give it to you, Teresa. But I really, this is hit me, guys. It hit me. You know how someone, I don't know if you've ever been into a Black church, Black Baptist church, you get hit with the spirit, they say. So I just had a spirit moment. So let me throw it to Teresa. Yes.
Amazing. No, Frederick, I was just so captivated and inspired and uplifted, and was I could have listened to you continue on for a while. And yeah, this one piece where we find our humanity in the through lines. Wow. Yeah, that's really, really beautiful. And yeah, to kind of give proof and concept and evidence to what you were sharing about how all of our stories help us. We find example in them. We find reflection in them. Jen in our virtual community shared they have found reconnection to family, jobs, and safe home for daughter, and thanks to the master plan she wrote 8 years ago. Reading this book was such a glorious gift. So yeah, just we give thanks at the end of this, but just to take this moment to thank Chris for all of the energy and time and reflection and his own innate gifts and blueprint and striving and development that has led to him sharing so thoroughly in this book and created all these millions of points of reflection for everyone else who is reading it, including us, and discussing it today. So wow. Wonderful. Well, let's go to our next question, which again, our previous comments have touched upon some aspects of this, so I think we're just on a natural roll here. But the word accountability had been continuously coming up. So What do you think about a justice model that is rehabilitative rather than punitive? How are accountability and rehabilitation related? And how can we increase the efficacy of both? So there's kind of many parts of this question here, but generally a justice model that is rehabilitative rather than punitive. And then these aspects of how are accountability and rehabilitation related, and how can we increase the efficacy of both? Nicole, we haven't heard, excited to see your hand up. Please share.
Yes, thank you. I've been waiting for this question, and I was like, as soon as I could, I would raise my hand, and I want to speak like specifically to rehabilitation versus a punitive system, and I can see what else I can answer from there. But punitive punishment doesn't work, and punitive punishment is redundant because that's what punitive means, right? Like it just doesn't work. You can see it in recidivism rates, or folks that return to prison, even though we don't love that rate, because we want to see folks flourishing and thriving and transforming, not just not returning to prison. And that doesn't work, because when somebody is harming them further does not create the conditions for them to heal and then help others heal. So it just doesn't make sense. And that's why Prison Yoga Project exists. We recently changed our mission. It used to be that we provide yoga in prisons and jails to reduce recidivism, yada, yada. And then we realized, while that's an activity, the movement behind what we're doing is to transform the system, the entire system, and the conditions in which incarcerated folks, their families, correctional staff, everybody who touches this system is harmed. And so it's never going to work. And it is until we begin to rehabilitate, and not just say it's our mission, like, not because I go to facilities where that is posted, we are a rehabilitative facility, but until there is like a partnership commitment between facilities and community programs and all those out there doing good work to offer healing modalities, I don't think we're going to see a change. So to me, it's not like a choice between one or the other. It's like we have to do something different because people are suffering. So I definitely wanted to speak to that urgency. And I think when you create the conditions for healing, that's when the accountability comes in. I had mentioned in the chat, when someone's in fight or flight and just trying to survive, it's very hard to think of anyone other than yourself, because your whole physiology is based on your own survival. But when you have this space to recognize yourself and your own humanity, then naturally you begin to become more compassionate and more empathetic. So that's what we do through yoga, but I think it can happen through a lot of modalities. So thanks for letting me share about that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nicole. And yeah, just again, to go check out Prison Yoga Project for all of the amazing work they're doing. Stephen.
So I am a sworn police lieutenant, and my job is to keep people out of jail. And my job is also to eliminate additional trauma for people who are recovering. And with that, the accountability, there has to be accountability, but we have to move forward with and treat them as an individual. And the accountability has to be, how are they helping themselves move forward? And that's what I mean, the accountability there. The system is one in which it's there. And when you start looking at punishment and the different things in the criminal justice system, between what is the purpose? Is the purpose to punish? How is that going to achieve adding trauma to someone as we want them to move forward and be a great citizen when they're no longer incarcerated? Do we make examples of people? Does that work? I don't think so. The warehousing, and there's times people are warehoused because of the safety aspects. But when we start looking at how can we help people move forward with the rehabilitation, is we have to look at the trauma. I mean, I think this whole group started by The Body Keeps the Score, and looking at the history and people's trauma reactions. So until we address that trauma as part of the rehabilitation. And one last thing I think we have to look at is when he would think about what he talked about when they were in group therapy. And can people always, group therapy isn't always going to work, because it depends on who's in the group. And you have to feel comfortable So I do a lot of work with critical incident stress management, helping the community and police officers after traumatic incidents. And with that, we talk about a homogeneous group that when we pull people together, they all have to be comfortable being able to speak freely to get that healing moment from the group therapy that you're not always going to get if you're not comfortable.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. It's been really wonderful to have your perspective as a panelist here. It's not often that we've had someone who's within the county police department in here and speaking, and it's really wonderful to hear your trauma-informed responses and how it is that you all are working with people in order to divert them from the criminal justice system and working through a more behavioral mental health lens. So thank you for sharing those perspectives.
Thank you.
Yeah. See, Kelly, we haven't heard from you as much.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know how we change the system, right? Like that seems like a big, huge task. It's a whole mind shift, I think. But I think if we don't give people options to rise to the top, we're not going to know what people are capable of, right? So if we are only looking to punish them and just keep people down, that's all they're going to do. We're not giving them any reason to better themselves. And Chris gives multiple examples of different times where there's the new like college program that he's going to start, right? And there's 150 spots, or that Stephen started, I think. There's 150 inmates that want to participate for 20 spots. So there are people in there, right, that want to do things and want to better themselves, but they're not given the option to do that. And then like the Spanish study group that he starts, and there was a waiting list or whatever, and so many people wanted to do it. So I think we need to be working to rehabilitate and better people, because we're not going to get any. Many of them, right, are going to be coming out. So why are we further traumatizing them while they're in prison and giving more PTSD? I mean, he talks about all of that. So I think the quote that I like on page 233 of the book, well, page 232 and 233, he was talking about why do we need to take away hope, and hope powers change. So if we're not giving people the option or the opportunities, to be rehabilitated and to be better, we're taking away their hope. And to what end? Like, why are we doing that? And then on page 233, I really like how he says, everybody asks, how can we create more Chris Wilsons? And he says, it's simple. We have to want more Chris Wilsons. And I feel like that is just like, that sums it up. Like, how do we change society? Everyone is so afraid to parole people. I mean, I'm in Alabama, y'all. It is terrible here. I mean, in August, there were like 425 out of 450 people not paroled. Like, there's so few, there's so much fear in the system, and it's, but we have to want more Chris Wilsons. That's it.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. That puts changes the lens around to focus on something that we don't think about, is moving from punitive to rehabilitative, and just our general wellness perspective as a whole, going from treating illness versus creating wellness. So I really appreciate that. We are hopefully, Dr. Walker and Sister Debbie, you guys can hold your thoughts, for we are going on to our last question. And we have a number of questions lined up, but I might throw an audible in here, just since we've talked about some really wonderful things that touch upon these questions, like some of them are, what traits do we think contributed to Steve and Chris's efforts? How did the visit with the Edwards help us restore? So we've talked a lot about how different relationships highlight the importance of social support, but I was thinking if you all would be down for a little bit of an audible, since we're going to be preparing for next week, is if we could think into what are things that we would be excited and want to ask Chris. What things that we've talked about or haven't talked about that are things you would want to bring into conversation. And I know we've asked you all to submit questions, and that's great, but Frederick, what do you think? I know I'm kind of doing a little bit of an audible for our last question, but just to engage our current panelists and our community members on, now that we've had these weeks of discussion, what's remained undiscussed? What are things that were really big and that you would want to bring to conversation with Chris for next week, and kind of open up a forum there?
Yeah, please. Yes, please jump in and share. I definitely have a series of questions that I want to ask. So I want to yield my space to the space here to others first, and then we will I will share at the end. So Nicole, please jump in.
Sure. I'm so curious from Chris to learn more about his own self-care practices, because he discusses it in the book. I don't think it's a general theme, but he always makes sure to work out. He did so while he was incarcerated. He does so on the outside. But all I kept thinking the entire time is, when is he going to burn out? Or how is he preventing burnout? Because this work is so hard, and really just he deserves so much rest for all he does all the time. So that's what I'd be curious to know about. Where does that balance come in of that giving versus receiving, to maintain his ability to do that work?
All right. Stephen. Thank you.
For me, I was reading the book, I was extremely frustrated going through his childhood, looking at what we do for, did he ever receive positive interventions? And I look at things far upstream, that when there's traumatic incidents happened in his childhood, was anyone there to help formally from the outside? Looking at when he touched on some of his juvenile incarceration, again, did he get positive interventions? And then being a police officer, knowing what we do to help when people that hurt, was there trauma in the cop's history that led him to be the person that he was? Again, as we should always ask people, what experience have you had, instead of asking what's wrong with you, what have you experienced? Was there things in the cop's history that he's aware of that led him to be the person that he was? I really look at all those aspects of and that's where I was frustrated, and thinking all the missed opportunities that could have been there to help him at a young age.
Thank you. Thank you. So we just have a few more people. Yes, so let's do this. Artura, let's go to you.
You said it right.
Yes.
Yay, high five.
Okay, thank you.
I have curiosity around, was it a compelling, was it a part? Because there are so many times where he could have went one way and he chose the road less traveled, so to speak, right? Where he had this pay it forward mentality, belief, drive. There were so many times I remember him mentioning the book, yeah, I could have done that, but no, I just couldn't. I had to do this. It sounds, when you're listening to him talk, it really feels like you're just kind of, and that's another thing, he didn't have to narrate his own book, right, on Audible. It's so important to him that he wanted to narrate, so you get to hear it, the tone, the cadence, right, of how he delivers. And so I just, I guess I would have two questions, what was it that made you pick the road less traveled each time? And because it wasn't always easy going that way, right? None of this was easy. And then two, like, why was it so important for you to tell your own story in your own words, in your own way? Because I don't think that I don't think I would have had such an emotional reaction to the book. If I would have just read, I would have felt sad. Yeah, I'm sure I would have had these, but hearing him, like, there was just at times visceral reactions, right? Of hearing him say his own story in his own words. So, that's what my questions would be around. And, that's it.
So I apologize. I know that we have multiple hands, but we need to, we are going to just wrap up in a few seconds, but I just want to say, hold your questions, because I'm excited that Chris will be here next week. and we have, I hope everyone is open to submitting to be part of the panel, because I think it's going to be interesting to have him up close. One of my questions, I know we haven't really talked about it much in these 3 weeks, but I believe that although there were challenges in his immediate family structure, his family seeded certain positive things within him in their own struggles in life. They still seeded some very positive things that grew, and he had to grow. And I'm really curious, if he had an opportunity to go back in time, who would be the people, who would he go back to and talk to and explore with? And what would be the stories or the questions that he would want to revisit? I don't know about you, but as I get ready to turn 50, I am constantly understanding the various people who came across my path in life. And although in the moments of our struggles and challenges, I didn't understand them and I didn't understand the experience, but when you live a little bit longer, things make sense. And I begin to understand from different perspectives what might have caused people to respond and react in the ways in which they had to react. And so it actually has built in me a deeper sense of empathy and compassion, because as an adult, older person, I can see with new lenses, new eyes, new perspectives, even holding on to the same pain or challenges or reality that I encountered, I can see differently. And I'm curious about that with Chris. What does he see now that he couldn't see in the different chapters of his earlier life? So I want to say thank you for this conversation. It's so beautiful when we bring together people, and people can just share from where they are. I want to use a term that I use. It's like having a big pot of chili. I'm from Chicago. So in chili, you can have the red beans, the meat, the different items, and you put it all together and it just tastes so good. And you can have it separate, but when you put it all together, it is delicious. And as we enter this fall, and I know some people are in Alabama, chili is not the thing on the list, but it's just beautiful when you can combine a lot of different items, and just together is better. So I just want to say this has been such a enriching conversation, and I am about to have dinner after this. So this is my projection of I'm ready to eat. So this has been good. You've definitely been such a nice conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frederick. I have so enjoyed everything that you shared, and that pot of chili metaphor is great. I'm excited to go and have a late lunch here in California. And yeah, thank you all so much to everyone who's been tuning in virtually and sharing your thoughts there. It's really wonderful to feel the extended community. Thank you so much to the panelists and bringing all of your diverse experiences and thoughts and opinions, perspectives to share with us all. You know, it's not a small thing to come and be on a book club that gets broadcasted out to a broader community on YouTube and revisited. So thank you for your courage and openness and for the lives and experiences that you offer. Of course, big thanks to the Trauma Research Foundation for making this programming possible. It's been really wonderful ever since that it launched at the beginning of this year with The Body Keeps a Score, book written by the president of the foundation, Bessel van der Kolk, and Leisha Skye, who's our CEO, and the entire TRF team, who some of them are here with us. Laura, our programs manager, who leads our programs team, the heartbeat of our organization. We have 12 different programs in building. Stephanie Kimball, who's our program specialist, who's been leading the book club this season. Pat Murray, who is continuously here making sure that all of our programming goes off without a hitch as much as he can against the tech gods that be. And of course, a big thank you to the Prison Yoga Project, who were here with us in partnership for this season and all the work they do. And lastly, of course, a massive thank you to Chris Wilson, Bret Witter, and everyone really in Bret's story and journey, even including the parole officers and COs that have made his life difficult, I guess, for being a part of this journey and allowing us to come in and be witness to and learners and students of all of his experiences. So we are looking forward to our last week together next week. We hope you all join us because Chris will be here with us and that you bring in all of your questions. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Enjoy lunch or dinner.